Hello everyone, and welcome to the Darkest Hour. I'm your host, Amanda Jane. We all love a good story, a scary story, a compelling story. In a way, it's the oldest form of keeping traditions alive, keeping history alive. Storytelling and oral history has been around longer than just about anything else tied to human evolution. Even coming into this world, before we learn to read or write, we learn to listen. We're told stories, ones we remember well past our childhoods. Still today, we use it as a way to preserve our history. We may capture it in other ways too, maybe on video, through photos and stories behind those photos. But a lot of times it's those little bits of history that we're told by the ones we love about the times before we existed that really stick with us. Documenting our experiences in any fashion is almost like part of our evolutionary chain. Sure, our bodies can't live forever, but our stories can. So, let's get started, shall we? My mom told me a story of when her and my great-uncle Hector went caving. The year is 1990, and in the midst of a grueling final semester of my mom Maria's senior year of college, her grades were at the lowest they'd ever been. She was going to flunk out of college unless she thought of something pretty fast. My great-uncle Hector worked at an REI and was an experienced rock climber and caver. She knew he was out on the trails every weekend. Hector was pushing 70, but acted like he was 20. One Friday night, they're on the phone together and Maria's telling him her worries about failing her natural science class. That's when Hector had an idea. He said that new passages are always being discovered in caves, some big, some small. He was going on a hike this weekend. He suggests that she asked her professor if this cave exploration could count as some sort of credit. Maria had never set foot inside a cave before, but they thought that if they could find a new area in this cave, they could pull Maria's grade up to a passing grade. Hector seemed confident in the possibilities, feeling more comfortable with using an anonymous questionnaire on her professor's online messaging board rather than in person. Maria received a response on the message board from her professor, whose message was enthusiastic. Happily, he was accepting the student's mysterious wager. He replied, "If anyone can find a new cave passage, species, or insect or animal, while successfully recording and or documenting themselves in or at the place that they find it, I'll be happy to bump their grade up a grade and a half." Another message quickly popped up adding, "Don't kill yourself over a grade this weekend. You'll be able to make up credits by taking summer school classes." This was Maria's last year of college. In that summer, she had just landed her first job as Snow White, a cast member on one of the new Disney cruise ships. That ship wasn't sailing if my mom failed her senior year. Well, it would be sailing, just not with my mom on it, unless she brought her grade up. And in her words, dying in a cave would have been better than spending the rest of her life in Medford. After seeing her professor's response, Maria called Hector back, telling him that she would be accompanying him on the hike tomorrow. Hector packed their backpacks with lunch and supplies for the excursion that was planned on lasting the afternoon. It takes them hours to even reach the mouth of the cave. By that point, Maria's already gassed out. But Hector's already getting on his headlamp and beginning to crawl into a small, knee-high rock opening. Not wanting to slow down his pace, Maria quickly got on her headgear and followed after. When they got into the cave, the first room they crawled into was a large open area with 4 or 5 different passages. She slowly walks behind Hector as he takes one of the passages. Maria and Hector would then climb steep rock walls, squeeze through narrow openings, and jump crevasse gaps in the pitch black. Following a pitch-black path only Hector knew, Hector told Maria that the area he was looking for would be coming up soon. Both of them were extremely hungry from all the movement and decided to take a quick lunch break in the next open cavern they found. After some more tight squeezes, they entered a large room with a rock wall that reached further than either of their beams of light could reflect. Hector lets out a victorious yahoo that echoes all around them. Then they found a big flat rock to sit on and dig into the meals that Hector had prepared. With a small pen light, Hector shows Maria a map of the cave they're in, showing her where they've been and where they plan to go next, circling 3 spots that could potentially break off into other chambers. While Maria sits pretending to know what Hector's talking about, all she can think about is her future cruise in the summer sun. A sharp contrast from where she currently was. As Hector's drawing a line across the map, he suddenly stops and tells Maria to stop chewing. She sits there frozen with a bite of food in her mouth. It looked like he was listening for something. Hector tells her to turn off her headlamp. Maria flips her switch at the same time that Hector flips his. And then they're both sitting quietly, silently, in the damp, dark cavern, listening. Maria still didn't know what this was all about, but she didn't dare to interrupt the air around them. Then she heard it.
Help me!
Maria started to whisper, "Did you?" but gets cut off by Hector's shh. Making sure to stay completely still, Maria goes back to listening to the voice, and again, after a few moments of sitting in silence, they start hearing this voice calling out to them. It's saying,
"Hello, hello, help me, help me."
Maria is about to stand up and call out to it, but almost predicting Maria would do that, Hector reaches over and rests his hand on her shoulder with light pressure. Then the voice that they're hearing begins to change and distort until it's a completely different sounding person calling for help. The words and sentence patterns start to change. What's now echoing off the walls was like human speech, but it kept cycling through different voices, and none of the words were real words. Then they hear this talking begin to increase in volume. It was getting closer to where they were. But with the sound bouncing off the hard surfaces all around them, they weren't able to pinpoint where it was coming from. They knew whatever it was, or whoever it was, they knew that they were there. Now the only question would be if they could see Hector and Maria sitting still on the rock. For a brief moment, the voice stops. They're still listening to narrow in a direction that it could be coming from. Maria sits on the cold rock, absolutely terrified. She's having a hard time controlling her breathing. Hector keeps his hand on her shoulder. Neither of them can see each other, but Maria can feel the tightening of Hector's grip, and she can tell he's afraid too. Then they hear something crawling around the rocks, and it sounds like it's coming from directly above them. Maria's looking into the same black as any other direction that she could look, and she starts to pray in her head, praying to God that whatever this thing was, it would just turn around and crawl in any other direction but down. But sure enough, as it started to repeat nonsense words, they heard it begin to make a slow descent towards where they were. While it was talking, Hector leans over and tells Maria that on the count of 3, he's going to turn his headlamp on, and they're going to run. Don't grab anything, just focus on staying as close to him as possible. Then Hector whispered, 1, 2, 3. His headlamp turns on, and the white light blinds Maria for a second, but she doesn't have time to stop. Hector doesn't look up. He doesn't turn around. He's just making his way back, retracing where they'd entered from. As they're squeezing through the crack, Hector's ahead of Maria, but they can both hear the creature's noises, getting more animated and loud. In the dark, they hear what sounds like a loud slap echo through the open cavern. Whatever it was that had been hunting them had just moved from the wall of the cave to the floor. Hector pushed his way through and started pulling Maria the rest of the way through. When they heard the footsteps begin running in their direction, they really panicked. It sounded like a person running on gravel. Maria held onto the back of Hector as they navigated the twists and turns back in the direction from which they'd come. Eventually, the sound of their pursuer died off, and they could slow down. When they exited the mountain, it wasn't until halfway down that Maria remembered she'd just left all of her school supplies and any hopes of a passing grade in the cave. As the adrenaline wore down, Hector's fear turned into a sort of fascination, like an epiphany. He concluded that most Native American cryptids explore the forests, but primarily reside inside the infinite amount of cave systems located throughout the land, entering and exiting through hidden passages no one's dared attempted to squeeze into. His hypothesis turned into infatuation and obsession. During that summer, my mom had to make up credits. Hector instead went back to the cave system with a friend, twice. Once he was successful in the trip, even bringing back samples which he initially had no idea what to do with, but eventually sorted that out and decided to go back. He returned a second time with the same friend. Tragically, that time, Hector's friend would return saying that Hector had lost his footing and fallen in a crevasse. My mom says the hardest part for the family was the fact that they were never able to recover his body from the caves. Personally, I stay far, far away from those things. I'm not here to claim demonic possession is real or that I know a goddamn thing about it. I'm just here to relay a story, one that I experienced firsthand but can't really explain it outside of what I'm going to share here. I was sitting in the doctor's office waiting to have some lab work done. This was all for physical required for employment, and yes, everything came back normal. Then the nurse lady called me back and I followed her to my exam room. She was really nice, and we just kind of made small talk on the way there. Just as we were about to walk inside the room, she stopped and said, "Oh, I don't know where my head is at today. We've got to go get your height and weight. Follow me." So I follow her back towards the scales. When we get there, she starts to sort of ramble to herself, and I don't know if she wants weight or height first, so I take my shoes off and then step under the height measuring thing. Then she snapped at me. "No, not there, idiot." So, when I say snapped, I mean it. It was harsh and loud, but more than anything, even her calling me an idiot, I was most disturbed by the voice. It didn't even sound like the same woman who'd been speaking before. It was guttural and masculine. The kind woman who had been escorting me moments ago had somehow disappeared inside this monster of a human. Her eyes, I could have sworn they were almost bright blue before, but now they were so dark I struggled to find color. Another nurse heard it, of course, and walked over to see if everything was all right, to which my nurse responded by snapping in the same voice, "Mind your own damn business." I'd never seen an adult person act this way, let alone a nurse. I was shocked, so much so that I hadn't even moved from underneath the height thingy. Then I watched as my nurse clasped her hands over her mouth. It was as if she was shocked by her own behavior, and before I knew it, she was crying and excusing herself entirely. The other nurse looked about as shocked as I did, but eventually composed herself and took over where the last nurse had stopped. Honestly, I was about ready to leave and reschedule the whole thing, but it already took me so damn long to get this appointment I couldn't bring myself to bail. I never saw that nurse again, but I heard her. It was while I was waiting in my room for my new nurse to bring me some pamphlets on smoking cessation. It was that unmistakable, guttural voice, and it was coming from just outside my room. I could hear her telling someone to get the hell away from her, followed by what sounded like someone getting pushed. Needless to say, I was waiting a while. But when I finally got to talk to the doctor again, I asked her if everything was okay with that nurse. I mentioned that she called me an idiot and appeared to be having some sort of breakdown. The doctor just assured me that she would be fine. She's going to take the day off, of course, but she'll be fine. She then asked if there was anything she could do to make me feel better. Anything that could make my experience better. It was weird, sort of like I was at a hotel or something, but I told her I was fine. I wasn't going to lodge a complaint or anything like that. I was just genuinely worried about that woman. She thanked me for my concern, and that was that. I opted to use a different facility moving forward, so no idea whatever happened to that nurse. But I sure hope she got the help she needed, and hopefully it was a priest. So I thought I would share the story about when my granddad killed my dad's best friend. It happened back in the late 70s when Dad was 20 and still living at home. His friend Matt and Matt's girlfriend Becky, they were all listening to music in his room when another friend wanted to take them to a party. Well, they all went and had a great time until eventually they were driven back. By this point, it was the middle of the night. Matt and Becky were ready to go home, but they couldn't find their car keys. Finally, they decided it would be best to drive Becky home in Granddad's van and then come back to look some more. First off, the thing about this Granddad is that he was in World War II, and he struggled with PTSD for the rest of his life. He passed away when I was only 6, so I was too young to understand his behavior. For the most part, I was just afraid of him. Mainly because he would be nice one minute and yelling the next. Then again, I was only around him a few times a year. And second off, the van had one of those bench seats in the front. I honestly don't know what to call them. It was one long seat that sat 3 instead of 2 individuals. Dad was on the driver's side, window down. Becky was in the middle, and Matt was on the passenger side. Dad leaned forward to put the key in the ignition, and at the exact same second, there was a loud bang as something whizzed past the back of his head. Along with a sound he couldn't quite put words to, he also heard Becky's heart-stopping screams. Before he could understand what happened, he heard the sound of my grandmother screaming. She was crying, "It's Danny, stop! It's Danny, stop!" When Dad turned towards the sound of her voice, he saw my granddad standing outside of his window with a gun pointed directly at his head. And the look on his face said that he was having one of his flashbacks. Dad instantly understood what had caused the loud bang and what had brushed his hair as it whizzed past. Meanwhile, Becky was still screaming. He describes the second it took him to turn his head as the longest moment of his life. So many thoughts and scenarios raced through his mind that it felt like hours were passing. Then, he finally saw the extent of damage done. The bullet hadn't struck Becky as he'd thought. It went straight through Matt's temple. Dad's best friend was now slumped against the window, dead, and his girlfriend was covered in his blood. The police came, but no criminal charges were filed. Since Granddad had been in the war and had a well-documented history of PTSD, he was only required to participate in court-mandated therapy. But again, this was the 70s. They were probably still calling it shell shock for all I know. Either way, no one made my grandfather stick to those appointments. He went for a few weeks and decided that they were making him worse, so he stopped going. Things never really were right between my dad and grandfather again, but they made a sort of peace with one another before Granddad passed away. It really goes to show you, we have absolutely no idea how long any of us will be here. Tragedy can literally strike anytime, anywhere. In the 70s, my dad was attending college in Florida. and he lived near a river that he and his friends would go swimming in. They weren't really supposed to, but it was easy to get away with back then. He actually remembers that they were surprised by the fact that more locals didn't use their spot. Well, they went a handful of times without incident, but they eventually learned why no one else used it. One weekend, Dad and a couple of friends took some girls out there with an ice chest, planning to make a whole day of it and hopefully night. They were in and out of the water the whole time, and everyone was drunk by lunch. While they were eating, one of the friends, Alan, stepped on some broken glass and cut the bottom of his foot pretty badly. He went to wash it in the river, but made a joke out of dramatically jumping all the way into the water. The spot where everyone was eating sat atop a small hill. From their point of view, everything below Alan's shoulders was concealed behind tall weeds, including the water itself. One minute he was singing a silly tune, and the next he suddenly dropped out of sight and began screaming. Then, the sound of splashing grew more intense, beyond what one person could manage, and they knew he wasn't joking. Everyone rushed down to see Alan in the fight of his life with what they would later identify as a bull shark. Did you know that bull sharks are not only one of the most aggressive types of sharks, but they're also one of the few that are capable of surviving in fresh water? They're known for getting into Florida rivers, but no one ever bothered to tell Dad and his friends that that was the reason they shouldn't go swimming. Alan never saw it coming. He just suddenly felt the worst pain of his life radiating up his leg and through his entire body. It caught him so off guard that he could only envision his foot as being trapped in some kind of jagged, rotting tree stump. But then that stump suddenly pulled him underwater again, and he realized whatever had him was alive. In an act of sheer desperation, he flailed out with his free leg and felt it make contact with the shark. But he also felt a fresh, much more intense shockwave of pain shoot through his entire body as the shark's jaws snapped shut. The last bits that were hanging onto his foot were severed, and Alan was propelled backwards, a little closer to the shore. To add insult to injury, he saw his foot bob to the surface a few times before losing sight of it. Come to find out, sharks aren't huge fans of how we taste. This one was clearly just an aggressive asshole. It was about this time that the group arrived at the water's edge. The girls began screaming at the river of blood, while Dad and their other friend waded in just far enough to drag Alan back to shore. They both screamed when they saw his leg. The shark had bitten into the lower part of his shin bone, and the jagged remains protruded from his shredded flesh, along with a jumble of indescribable tendons and veins. Dad said it looked like someone ran his leg through a meat grinder. Alan ultimately lost everything below the knee. He also got addicted to morphine and dropped out of college. Thankfully, he was able to turn his life around in the end. 5 years later, he got clean, and he started working at a paper mill. Then a few years after that, he started a family. He actually passed away earlier this year, and that's what made Dad think of the story. I'm sad I never got to meet him, but I'm really happy his story had a happy ending. That being said, how the hell did I not know about river sharks? As part of a history project in college, we were tasked with exploring a piece of our own family history, specifically connecting with information from those no longer with us. We were told that we could have as little or as much information as possible on the person or the piece of history, but it was our job to create a historically accurate yet compelling story. My family is huge. I don't know a lot of them, but my mom is one of those that keeps up on what everyone is doing all the time, and she's part of those ancestry websites. So all I had to do was ask her, and I knew that she'd lead me down the most interesting path. My great-grand-uncle Charlie was a Catholic priest, one who participated in exorcisms nonetheless. I never personally had the chance to meet him, and he died in the late 90s. But my mom always spoke very fondly of him and kept a lot of his things. She says he was a man of a million stories. Apparently on the side, he was a bit of a self-proclaimed author. One of his short stories was actually published in a local magazine in Minnesota back in 1981. I'm sure it was great, but personally, I never read that one. Amongst the various articles, notebooks, cool photos, I was most interested in his personal notebooks. These were writings he'd never published, things he'd experienced in his lifetime as a priest and just in life in general. I found several intriguing stories, and at first it was hard to just focus on one thing. Next thing I knew, I'd already gone through one of his notebooks in its entirety. He wrote lots about his earlier days, and I found these to be some of his most interesting. I'm choosing to share this one with you all because it gave me full body chills. The entry is from 1989, but he talks of a time before that. It's the story of his second exorcism. January 1st, 1989. This evening, while processing the passing of Bishop McHale, I was reminded of a case from my younger days as a priest. I encountered extraordinary yet terrifying events often, but it was this one that forever altered the course of my future with the church. It was a somber evening, much like tonight, when the news reached me. Bishop McHale came to the Archbishop and myself, carrying stories of a young woman plagued by a demonic possession. Shortly after Bishop McHale finished reciting the various ailments which had been reported to him, Archbishop McAllen granted permission for us to move forward. With a heavy heart, I embarked upon the solemn duty of performing an exorcism. It was new for me. It was only my second one, but I was honored, ready, and I was not alone after all. There was Bishop McHale, but there was also the Heavenly Father, too. That's what you can never forget, never lose sight of. Arriving at the family's humble abode, I was struck that it wasn't so far away from my own. I could sense a palpable darkness hanging in the air where the afflicted woman resided. The family was desperate for salvation. This was obvious at once as they greeted us with a mix of trepidation and high hopes. They guided us to the room where the young woman lay. My first observations of the woman were that her eyes were vacant, almost blackened, and her body was contorted in unnatural ways. Compassion and fear intertwined within me. The woman was restrained, gently but still. The ties on the pieces of satin were secure. The family feared the young woman, but loved her greatly. The room became even more tense upon the arrival of Bishop McHale and myself, so we began the ancient ritual of exorcism almost immediately. Not long after we started, the room was filled with prayers, the scent of incense, and the flickering light of the candles. I recall their glow casting eerie shadows on the walls, shadows which couldn't compare to the real evil inside the room. The demon within the woman fought vehemently, its presence becoming increasingly malevolent with each passing moment. The woman writhed and convulsed, her voice transforming into an otherworldly growl before once again mimicking the cries of a natural woman. For a moment she was lucid, crying and pleading that she couldn't see, that she couldn't hear. She begged and pleaded with the room, trying to understand what was happening to her. We told her to be strong, to fight it. Though she didn't stay long, her voice distorted again as she screamed and laughed obscenities at the room. It was that moment which I caught a glimpse of the demon that had taken a hold of her. Its eyes now reflected the depths of its wickedness. The creature's voice echoed with a chilling resonance, one that was filled with hatred, so much so that it shook me deep to my core. She spoke and spat vile things at everyone in the room, focusing heavily on Bishop McHale and myself. Wicked accusations, horrific imagery that they tried to paint. It was relentless. They were spewing wildly, switching from English to Latin to something entirely unintelligible. This was nothing like my first experience, the one that I wrote about in 1986. This demon was unlike anything I'd experienced in the church, unlike anything I'd experienced in life. I would be lying if I said that there was no fear. I kept it deep down in the depths where only I knew it existed. Throughout, I remained steadfast. It's of great importance that you never lose faith. It's always my faith grounding me in the face of this ancient evil. My voice wavered at times, sure, but I pressed on, reciting the sacred words with unwavering determination. Bishop McHale doing the same, as the prayer of St. Michael radiated from the two of us, filling the room. The battle was all too grueling. I call it a battle as it's the closest I've come to fighting something, aiming to destroy something before it could further destroy this woman. Bishop McHale and I continued exorcising the demon. As the hours passed, I watched the poor woman's vessel endure tortures no one ever should. Still, we didn't stop. She was in and out of consciousness. She was weak, but we also watched as the demon's grip weakened too, and its resistance fading. With one final prayer, a large surge of energy, it was expelled from the young woman, instantly leaving her limp and exhausted, but alive and breathing. The whole room felt as if it was singing. The reality is it was silent. A beautiful silence settled upon the room, broken only by the sound of our breathing. I found myself forever changed in the aftermath of this encounter. The experience had deepened my understanding of the forces that exist beyond our mortal realm. It ignited a thirst within me to delve further into the realm of spiritual warfare, to study the ancient texts, to learn more of the nature of demons and possession. It was in the following years that I became known for my expertise in exorcisms. Bishop McHale, too, he was my teacher, my mentor. Bishop McHale, the church had recognized his dedication and entrusted him with the responsibility of training future priests in the sacred art of battling darkness. As one of his pupils, I too would go on to train future priests. Of course, this was all before I stopped this work, pre-1980. Because the truth is, with each successful exorcism, a part of my soul grew heavy with the weight of what I had witnessed. The horrors I had faced took their toll, and with time I began to question the fragility of my own faith. The demons confronted were not confined to the pages of Scripture. They were real, tangible entities that tested the limits of my resolve. In the end, it was the haunting memories of this second exorcism that led me to reevaluate my path. I chose to step away from the front lines, to devote myself to research and contemplation, seeking a deeper understanding of the spiritual realm and its interplay with our moral existence. And though my days of performing exorcisms may have come to an end, the impact of that fateful event and so many others remain etched in my soul. It forever shaped my future, guiding me towards a different kind of service, one that seeks to illuminate the shadows, one that seeks to offer solace to those who find themselves entangled in its ominous grasp. It also brought me closer to my dearest friend, Bishop McHale, whom I will see again one day. Then my great-grand-uncle ends it by inserting a prayer. I've included it here, but don't expect you to read it. I did some research, and this is a prayer often used during the passing of a member of the clergy. Thanks for listening. If I come across anything else worth sharing, I certainly will. Well, friends, it appears we've reached the end of tonight's episode. So, thanks for joining me, whether it's your first time or you're a regular. Your support means the world over here, so thanks for listening. We've got brand new episodes every Friday night. Keep those eyes open long enough to find those deep sleep videos. And of course, double features. Subscribe, tap the bell, and you'll never miss a thing. Big thanks to those who shared their stories, and a huge shout out to all of my patrons, whom I appreciate so very much. Tracy S, Tamara K, Monica L, ZoeWatt, Chelle B, Donald C, The Dark Cosmos, Marion T, Rat Girl, Alisha S, Erin G, Nikki H, Mr. Revenant, Naz K, Brendon G, Paul T, Nicholas C, Lissane, Arlene F, and Adrienne. If you want to support the Darkest Hour in other ways, consider joining my Patreon, patreon.com/thedarkesthour, or click the link in the description to learn more. Do you have stories like these? I'd love to share them. Send them to me, amandadarkesthour@gmail.com, or on the Darkest Hour subreddit, The Darkest Hour YT. Stay spooky.